What would you do if the person you trusted most revealed a secret that shattered everything you thought you knew? In a quiet suburban home, where the walls held memories of laughter and love, a single moment was about to unravel a family's carefully woven bonds. The air was thick with anticipation that evening, as the Thompson family gathered for what they believed would be a routine dinner. Little did they know, the night would end with hearts racing and truths laid bare. Lila Thompson sat at the polished oak dining table, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her napkin. At 28, she was the picture of resiliency, a woman who had built a modest life as a schoolteacher, her days filled with the chatter of children and the satisfaction of shaping young minds. But tonight, her hazel eyes were clouded with worry, her usual warmth replaced by a quiet unease. Across from her sat her husband, James, a kind-hearted architect whose gentle smile couldn't mask the tension in his shoulders. Their 1-year-old daughter, Emma, babbled in her high chair, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. At the head of the table was Richard Hawthorne, Lila's father-in-law, a man whose name commanded respect in boardrooms and beyond. A self-made millionaire, Richard had built an empire in real estate, his sharp mind and unyielding determination earning him wealth beyond imagination. Yet, despite his success, he remained an enigma to Lila. His piercing blue eyes seemed to see through people, and his rare smiles carried a weight that made you wonder what secrets he held. Tonight, he was unusually quiet, his gaze flickering between Lila and the empty wine glass in front of him. The dinner began with the usual pleasantries talk of Emma's latest milestones, James's new project, and the weather's unrelenting chill. But Lila's heart wasn't in it. Her thoughts were consumed by a letter she'd received that morning, tucked inside an unmarked envelope. The words were seared into her mind. Your husband is not who you think he is. No signature, no explanation, just a single sentence that had turned her world upside down. She hadn't told James yet, unsure if she could bear to hear the truth or face the possibility of a lie. As the meal progressed, Lila's unease grew. She pushed her food around her plate, her appetite gone. Richard noticed. He always noticed. Lila, you're awfully quiet tonight, he said, his voice low but commanding. The room stilled, forks pausing midair. Lila forced a smile, but it faltered. Just tired, she mumbled, her eyes dropping to her plate. James reached for her hand, but she pulled away, the gesture small but sharp. Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Tired, he repeated, as if testing the word. Or is it something else? His tone wasn't accusatory, but it carried an edge that made Lila's pulse quicken. She met his gaze, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink, leaving just the two of them locked in a silent battle of wills. Then, to everyone's surprise, a tear slipped down Lila's cheek. She swiped it away, but not before Richard's eyes caught it, narrowing with something unreadable. The silence was suffocating. James looked between his wife and father, confusion etching his face. Lila's mother-in-law, Margaret, a soft-spoken woman who preferred gardening to confrontation, cleared her throat nervously. But before anyone could speak, the doorbell rang, a sharp chime that sliced through the tension. James frowned. Who could that be at this hour? Lila's heart sank. She knew. She hadn't told anyone, but she'd invited someone to dinner, a decision made in a moment of desperation after reading the letter. As James went to answer the door, Lila braced herself. Moments later, he returned, followed by a woman no one expected. Clara, Lila's estranged sister. Clara was a ghost from Lila's past, a sister she hadn't spoken to in 5 years. Their falling out had been bitter, rooted in old wounds, Clara's reckless choices, Lila's unforgiving pride. But the letter had mentioned Clara hinting that she held answers Lila needed. Clara stood in the doorway, her auburn hair pulled back, her eyes wary but resolute. "I'm here because you asked me to be," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of every gaze in the room. Richard's expression hardened. "What's this about, Lila?" he asked, his voice like steel. Lila took a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she reached in her pocket and pulled out the letter. "This came today," she said, her voice breaking. "It says James isn't who I think he is." And it mentioned Clara. She handed the letter to Richard, who read it in silence, his face unreadable. James's eyes widened. "Lila, why didn't you tell me?" he asked, hurt lacing his words. But before she could answer, Clara spoke. "It's not about James," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "It's about you, Richard." The words hung in the air, a bombshell that froze everyone in place. All eyes turned to the millionaire at the head of the table. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Clara stepped forward, undeterred. "I wrote the letter," she admitted. "Not to hurt you, Lila, but to protect you. I've been digging into Richard's past. He's been hiding something big." She pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. "These are documents proving Richard's company has been buying up properties in low-income neighborhoods, forcing families out to build luxury condos. He's been doing it for years, and he's been using shell companies to cover his tracks." Lila's breath caught. She looked at Richard, searching for denial, for outrage, anything. But he remained still, his eyes locked on Clara. "Is this true?" Lila whispered, her voice trembling with betrayal. James, too, looked at his father, disbelief etched across his face. Margaret's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Richard finally spoke, his voice calm but heavy. "It's true," he said. The room seemed to stop breathing. "I've done things I'm not proud of. I told myself it was business, that progress comes at a cost. But seeing you cry tonight, Lila, knowing I've caused you pain, even indirectly it changes things." He stood, his imposing figure softened by something raw, something human. "I've spent my life building an empire, but I've neglected what matters most. Family." He turned to Clara. "You're right to call me out. I've hidden behind my wealth, thinking it could shield me from accountability. But no more." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black notebook. "This contains every deal, every decision I've made that crossed a line. I'm giving it to you, Clara. Do what you think is right." The room was silent, every heart pounding. Clara took the notebook, her hands shaking. Lila's tears fell freely now, not from sorrow, but from the weight of truth and the flicker of hope. James reached for her hand again, and this time she let him hold it. Margaret, still processing, murmured, "Richard, what does this mean?" "It means I'm stepping down," Richard said, his voice steady but laced with regret. "I'll face whatever comes, lawsuits, headlines, all of it. But first, I'm making things right, starting with this family." He looked at Lila, his eyes softening. "You're the daughter I never deserved. I'm sorry." Lila didn't know if she could forgive him, not yet. But as she looked at Clara, at James, at little Emma giggling in her high chair, she felt a spark of something new. Not just truth, but the possibility of healing. The room, once frozen in shock, began to thaw with the warmth of honesty, fragile but real. And in that moment, Lila knew that whatever came next, they would face it together.